Today I'll be telling you some reflections on lessons that I've learned from my own students. I'm very honored to be included with a group of speakers who are quite impressive and quite accomplished. I run a lab at KAUST, and at any given point in time, I have 15 students and postdocs that work for me and work in the lab. But over the years, we've managed to graduate over 40 students. And in my lab, we work on a material called perovskites, and that's a semiconductor material, and we use it to create applications in solar cells, displays, photodetectors, lasers, and any kind of application we can think of. And we became quite good at some point at what we do, and we started setting records in solar cells, in LEDs, and finding new applications for these materials. In fact, we became so good that this year, to my surprise, my lab was ranked amongst the top 10 around the world by the Times Higher Education, it came as a complete surprise to me because I only started in 2010, and things were quite dire back then to me. I just started. No one gave me a formula for how to build a lab or how to supervise students or how to do anything, to be frank. To make matters worse, by the time we finished building the lab, our ideas became stale. The ideas that I was so excited to implement when I first started became stale, just like everything in life. Research fields and opportunities, they fleet over time. And so if you don't catch them early on, you'll find a lot of competition, and you'll end up in a position where you have diminishing returns. You don't get the same return on investment. And so at that point, we were there. It didn't look too good. So to me, I started asking myself, how do we get from that point till 2018? And I started looking at my most successful students. And I found out that they come from all walks of life, from Saudi Arabia, from all over the world. Some of them are now professors themselves. And they cross all genders. All students are smart, actually. You'd wonder, you think maybe being smart is the one thing that made them successful, but they actually had. It wasn't that they were smart. I found that they had one really key attribute that, in my opinion, was very different about them than the rest of the students in the class. And that was they were passionately curious. They had this habit of, if they found something interesting, they just drop everything and start studying it, no matter what was the original objective. And if you become passionately curious, you start approaching solutions before the problem. You start approaching things like Michelangelo does when he approaches sculptures. He looks at the stone first, and the stone tells him what the sculpture will look like. And so these students always looked at the problems. They looked at the solutions first before the problems. Let me tell you a bit of an anecdote. One hot summer night in 2014, not a romantic place to be at in the lab, one of my students was running a routine crystallization experiment. And in crystallization, it's basically you dissolve a compound and you try to regrow it. For example, you dissolve sugar in hot boiling water, and you cool it down. And over time, as it cools down, the sugar gets expelled and sugar forms, and you'll see it. And that's how you get some candy. But my student at the time, he made a sort of mistake. He couldn't find the solvent that he was looking for, so he just substituted one of the solvents. And he started raising the temperature instead of cooling it down. And he saw something quite interesting. Instead of getting solubility, he was getting inverse solubility. The crystal started growing. This was not part of the project It was not part of any objective. But really that got us, the student got me very curious, and we spent a lot of time on this problem. It actually turned out that was the problem that really created the big breakthrough for my group. And we were able to jump to a new field, open up a new field, and the rest was just history. And that's how we made it, just by following our curiosity and just letting our curiosity tell us what to do. So sometimes I wonder if we spend a lot of, most of our time trying to find answers to difficult questions or trying to find solutions to very challenging problems, and not letting our curiosity guide us to finding the problems for the solutions sitting right in front of us. Thank you.